This videos, I'm SYED and you're watching Faultlines. Pakistan is facing a very serious political turmoil these days. And this political turmoil has given birth to many other crises. On one end, there is a coalition government in place which is trying to address all these issues. But on the other end, there is an opposition that is standing alone and is demanding elections, which apparently the government is not agreeing to. Now, amid all of this, there are various crises that the country is facing at the moment, and that requires a lot of attention by the government. First and foremost is the catastrophic flood of 2022, a flash flood that is unmatched, that caused unmatched damage. In our national history, we have never faced something like what we saw this year. This flood took 30% of the land of country under water and has severely hit the feeble state of agriculture in this country. Many people, as of now when we speak, are still waiting for help from the government side. There is a new campaign of terrorism. There is a new round of terrorism hitting this country. Just today we have seen an incident that has taken place in Islamabad, an attacker who has been stopped. But this is a part of a new campaign of terror that is terrorizing the citizenry of this country. Amid all of this, there is a severe economic challenge, perhaps unmatched once again, a challenge we have never seen an economic crisis of this magnitude in our recent past. But despite all of this, not only the government but also the media is talking about their politics, and very little talk is coming toward addressing the right questions. Therefore, we have invited in today's program Fahad Hussain, not only a leading journalist but currently working as special assistant to Prime Minister of Pakistan. Fahad, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I hope you don't mind me calling you journalist every time, because for me this is your first introduction.
Well, since I've spent almost 30 years being a journalist, so I suppose the identity will remain with me, even though I'm not doing active journalism anymore.
First things first, Fahad. So I grew up reading your writings. Actually started learning English literature out of the writings that you just made. And today I'm talking to you as a spokesman to Prime Minister. Now, this journey from a journalist who is supposedly a neutral person, not part of any political camp, is joining a political camp and is becoming chief spokesman or spokesman to the Prime Minister. How does that look?
Well, it's a very conscious and deliberate decision that I've taken. And of course, there are many reasons for it. But one of the key reasons was that, I decided that I've done journalism for almost 3 decades, in fact, a little bit more than 3 decades. And I did it to the best of my ability, whether it was in television or writing or speaking or managing. Everything that a journalist can do in Pakistan, I've tried to do it and do it in a good way. I think it was time for me to move on, like many people do. I think there is so much more that I can do, so much more that I can contribute to, so much more that I have to learn. And I thought that perhaps if I come into a public role, public policy, it's going to perhaps enable me to learn new skills and contribute in a different manner to the cause of Pakistan. So yes, it's a difficult decision. Yes, that I've received a lot of criticism, but also a lot of people who've supported my decision. I'm not the first one to do so, and I'm certainly will not be the last one to do so. But I think it is a transition that I thought I was ready for, and therefore I've done it.
But Fahad, your critics might say that a journalist joining the camps of the government, actually it takes the neutrality out of the media, because then there are other people who wants to be special assistant to Prime Minister, who would want to take a particular political side, side A or side B, and this will take the angle of neutrality away from the media at large. Would you agree with this?
No, I would completely disagree with that, because I think it's an individual choice. As long as I was doing journalism, I was doing it to the best of my ability. Then when I decided that I'm going to move on, then I did so openly. If you are in journalism and you're pretending to be biased while you're not, then you're being dishonest to your profession. But if you're doing it openly like I have, I think being a journalist and doing politics is far worse than moving from journalism openly into politics. And that's the course that I've taken.
And in journalism, English language became your recognition. You're widely recognized for being one of the finest writers in this country, that the journalism of this country has produced. Don't you believe that English journalism in Pakistan isn't receiving the kind of attention that it deserves, and particularly on the media screen?
I think journalism generally all over the world is under stress, Shabbat. And that is happening because of the dynamics of change in the communication world. With the rise of digital media, there is a renewed stress on television, on broadcast, and certainly on print, because audiences are moving away. And this is a trend which is not going to get reversed. So once the audience begins to move away, the entire business model of the traditional media begins to come under certain stress unless they can adapt to new situations. So there is a stress overall. Now if you bring that onto the Pakistani landscape, here too you see that both broadcast journalism and print journalism is struggling to produce the kind of content that the new generation now wants. And if you go even further into the category of English media that you were speaking about, I think again the problem is of relevance. Can the English media, whether it is print or television, and television of course unfortunately we only have perhaps this is the only channel that you have, and that's a different story that of course we can talk about later. The challenge of remaining relevant for an audience whose tastes are changing, whose platforms are changing, and whose outlook towards communication is changing. That is the challenge, and I think our media is struggling with that challenge.
And while we talk about these challenges and the emerging role of social media that according to you is taking mileage away or perhaps is taking attention away from the mainstream media, isn't it also an opportunity for many in the world of media to actually to be able to switch and to make a better use of these channels? Because I believe now everyone is a competitor to these mainstream channels.
Absolutely. I think, see, what has happened is that with the rise of digital media and the deep penetration of mobile phones in every society, including Pakistan, the entire framework of how media created content and disseminated it has changed. And what we call cord cutting, which is essentially that you've cut the cord, and once you have this phone in your hand, you're carrying content in your pocket. So you will only consume the content that you like, that you want, and that enriches you in one way or the other. And therefore, if you are a journalist and you want to reach your audience, you cannot remain chained to the traditional way of doing journalism, because then you're reaching a shrinking audience. And therefore, if you want your message to be communicated well, you need to know which platform to use and what format of content to use in that platform. And that's something which requires a lot of an ability to adapt to these changes. Some people can, and they are successful. Some people who still feel that they can survive by doing the old way of doing things, I think they have a big challenge in front of them.
Fahad, between 2008 to 10, all these major media, social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter became very popular. Lately, Instagram also joined the party. YouTube has now become very important. I'm seeing all of the major mainstream journalists having their own media channels their own channels on YouTube. And this has also had an impact on Pakistan's politics. Don't you believe that one party in specific has been extremely successful in utilizing this immense opportunity extended and is enjoying the perks of it even today?
I agree that whoever, and this applies not just to a political party, to even individuals, that whoever is able to harness change quickly will enjoy the dividends of that initiative. Of course, Pakistani politics has changed greatly in the last decade. Why? Because the Pakistani electorate has changed. And that change has happened quietly, but also very decisively. And those people or those institutions or those parties that were either slow to adapt to that change or thought that they could overcome these changing trends by sticking to their old way of doing things, they now realize that this was something that this was a decision that they should have made much earlier. Now, this coming election in 2023, I think is going to be driven a lot by communication through digital means. perception making, perception management in the digital arena requires a different kind of skill. Communicating on the digital arena, in the digital arena, requires a different kind of skill. And I think political parties are now coming around to the fact that they have no choice but to spend more and more, not just focus, but money on this platform.
That brings me actually to a difficult question. And I hope you allow me to ask you this. Now, many of your critics say that a person like you who has such an immense reputation, I mean, such a great reputation in the media, in the mainstream media, has been brought in specifically not only to address the social media for challenges for the political party that your current government belongs to, but also to come up with a strategy to overcome the propaganda that PTI is doing. And there is perhaps some social media cell that is running under your control. That is what is being said a lot on social media. Tell us more about that,
sure,
the media cell that you handled.
Absolutely. Number one, of course, Shabahat, I come from a certain background, which is well known. I've spent all my life in the media. I've been writing, speaking, both in Urdu and in English, and doing a number of other things that need to be done in the world of communication. So obviously, when I came onto this side and took on a political role, of course, I'm going to draw energy and from my own experience. Now, how that translates into what a political party requires is getting more and more clear as parties realize that communication is now one of the key elements of political success, if not the key element. So therefore, of course, whatever I will do will relate to ensuring that communication, messaging, perception management is done well, is done professionally, and is done effectively. Now, based on that, do I have a strategic communication cell? No, I don't. Does that mean that I'm not communicating effectively? I would like to think that I am, but the whole propaganda about this very secretive cell where all these things are being made and propaganda is being cooked up, all of that was based on complete untruths. And unfortunately, a lot of media channels ran with that untruth, which to me presents a concern, twofold concern. Number one, of course, the political party which accused me of this, had absolutely no grounds to do so, but I'm not surprised because this is not the first time they've done it. And I won't go into the US conspiracy theory and all those fantasy areas, which we can also talk about.
But I certainly will.
But the other disturbing part for me was the whole entire process of verification, which is an integral part of journalism. And channels which claim that they are doing journalism, when they bypass all of those processes and begin to broadcast propaganda coming from a political party, that to me shows that the entire structures of editorial management have weakened in Pakistan, and that does not bode well for the future of traditional journalism in Pakistan.
Fahad, before we move on hardcore politics, there's one more question that I was waiting for you to respond, and that is that when we see these top trends in the country, whenever I open my Twitter and go and see the top trends, these are not only politically driven narratives, but also most of the time use of shameful words, bad languages. I would not want my children to be on Twitter. It has become such a filthy, toxic space. Why is it so? Tell me as an expert of media industry.
I think this is the downside of social media. You see, when the entire essence of social media is that there are no filters. There are no structures. There are no people like editors who decide what is fit to print and what is not fit to print, etc., etc. So the breakdown of all these filters has enabled, in a way, it has done a good thing, that it has actually democratized this entire field of communication. Now everyone is a journalist. Everyone who has a cell phone is a journalist in the sense that he or she can broadcast and receive broadcasted messages. So in a way, this has changed the control that traditional media had over audiences. But the downside is, of course, exactly what you said, that because of the unfiltered nature of this medium, anybody can say anything and there's nothing that you can do about it. Now, this is a huge challenge. It is having a very damaging effect on societies, and obviously this is not confined to Pakistan only. It's happening all over the world. Therefore, the attempts to regulate social media are gaining ground. Now, that's a tricky thing, because you have to regulate social media without having to clamp down on the freedom of expression. So, of course, even in mature media markets like the US or Europe, even there they're struggling with regulation. In Pakistan also, there's been some legislation, and there is more that is happening. But ultimately, yes, we need to find some way to minimize the negative fallout of social media without having to curtail its power to enable people to communicate freely.
Fahad, coming to the political situation of the country, that actually is so drastic these days that we wanted someone like you to address these issues. I would have originally wanted the Prime Minister to respond to this question, but since you are his spokesperson, would the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mia Mohammad Shahbaz Sharif, would have wanted to take the decision of taking the government and throwing a PTI governments out by a voting process, by a democratic process, if he would have known the consequences that followed?
I think the decision making at that time was based on factors which at that time were very relevant. Vote of no confidence is a democratic process. Every party has a right to do it.
Absolutely.
It's not the first time it's been done. It's not the last time it's being done. So to draw a huge conspiracy theory narrative around it, I believe is completely wrong. And of course, we've seen how that entire narrative of US involvement in the so-called change of government has turned out to be absolutely false. It was based on nothing, literally nothing. It was a cipher, which is a normal thing in the world of diplomacy. So the entire narrative that the PTI built around it was false. Of course, it enabled the party to weaponize its grievances and then draw support from its electorate. But Shahbaz, a fact is a fact is a fact. And if your narrative is based less on facts and more on fantasy, you may find some support for it in the short term. But in the longer term, people realize that if your narrative doesn't have legs to stand on, then it was essentially meant to take people for a ride. That's point number one. Point number two, did the government or the parties which ultimately formed the government, did they know how bad the situation was? Well, we have our previous finance minister, I can quote him on that, he said that we had a fair idea. But when they came into government, it's only then realized how bad the economic situation was. I think, of course, people don't have benefit of hindsight. So you take decisions based on the information that you have at that particular moment. That decision was taken. The government is now responsible for steering this country out of difficult waters. We can talk about the fact that the way that the previous government was going, we were also going down. So now it's a question of, in these difficult times, in these difficult global times, how can we manage to produce results that can pay dividends in the next elections? It's a tricky situation.
But Fahad, in any case, if the international hostile environment that we are talking about, I mean, absolutely, people like me and you are aware of what is happening in the world. We know of other countries that are facing similar situation. But allowing Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf to complete its tenure and to become extremely unpopular, they had started losing election. What triggered all of this? I mean, it was a win-win situation for PMLN to be the second largest political entity of this country.
These are the big what ifs of history. And of course, we can always go back and talk about what if at that point somebody had taken this decision, how would things have been different today? So the great what ifs of history are fun as a conversation. But when you have to take a decision, you take that decision based on what is available at that particular moment. I think right now, what you're talking about, I would say it is premature to pass a judgment. We are passing through a stage. Elections are due in 10 months. You're seeing how the PTI, in my opinion, Chairman Tehreek-e-Insaf has already peaked. He's taken a number of decisions in the last 6-7 months which have turned out to be wrong. Politically, he's tried everything possible, including falsehood, to produce early elections. Those are not happening. He's threatened dissolution of the assemblies, long marches, everything. Literally, he's thrown in everything, including the kitchen sink, into this narrative. He's failed. So I think to question whether the vote of no confidence was correct or not correct, I think it's premature. Right now, the government is doing the best it can, and let's see how things go till the time that elections come up in about 8-9 months.
Fahad, you said the propaganda produced by Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf America's conspiracy theory was wrong, right? It was a bunch of lies. Why Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf in that case has been so successful in selling this lie, and why your government, led by people as mighty as you in the field of media, have not been able to undo the popularity that the PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, has driven out of
I would actually question the premise of this whole popularity narrative. Of course, when PTI's government was thrown out and they came up with this conspiracy theory, it was a wild theory, and I think it sort of it banked on getting an emotional reaction from its own core supporters. It was only later that it turned out that this was completely false. Now, with the passage of time, you see how that entire edifice of that narrative is slowly collapsing. It's not a switch that you just turn on and turn off. But if you see over a period of time, you can see how slowly, gradually, the fact that the entire narrative was based on falsehood is now dawning upon people. Even those who are hardcore supporters of PTI, today when you ask them, well, what happened to the American conspiracy? They're like, well, we don't know this, that and the other. So my point is that as long as people begin to realize that a certain brand of politics is based not on facts, but on falsity which appeals to their voters' emotions and doesn't have any substantive logic to it, then I think ultimately in the long term that political party will lose. Of course, that still holds your point true, that the other side should be even more effective in ensuring that people know that this is a false narrative. I think now slowly and gradually that is beginning to have a certain kind of an impact.
You said if they have become popular. Now I have the scorecard of PTI in all the by-elections that have taken place. Let me quote just one figure. In Azad Kashmir, they have bagged 197 seats with overwhelming success in Punjab, in Karachi, in everywhere. And the coalition, despite the fact that they're in government, which certainly in Pakistan's given political situation is counted to be an advantage, has not been able to capitalize on its advantage. What do you believe can be the primary reason for it?
Absolutely. 2 points. Number one, again, if you see what's happened in the last 6-7 months, 7 months, 8 months, you can see two clear trends. Number one, the PTI was thrown out. It weaponized its narrative through falsehood and lies. It was able to convince its supporters that it was a victim of an international conspiracy, which was actually not there. So it was able to mobilize its support base. At that time, the new government was grappling with this economic mess which the PTI had left. And what was that mess? Remember, that mess was a direct byproduct of the IMF agreement, which the PTI actually sabotaged deliberately.
First went into the agreement
and then sabotaged.
Deliberately sabotaged.
Absolutely. So all of those decisions that the government of Pakistan was supposed to have taken in regard to the IMF agreement, the new government had to take them. If the new government did not take those decisions, Pakistan would have defaulted. As a result of which, of course, when you go into the IMF, you have to pay a certain price in terms of your political capital. So the government, so if you see these two trends, PTI weaponizing its narrative based on falsehood, and the government trying to grapple with the economic mess left by the PTI government and therefore bleeding its political capital. Because of this, of course, the government's popularity had to suffer. It was a logical thing. And PTI's popularity, so-called popularity, was kind of went a bit up because of that weaponized narrative. But now see what's happening. Look at the people say, well, look at the by-elections. Mr. Imran Khan won all the by-elections. My point is, A, he was standing himself in all of those. He can't do that in general elections, number one. Number two, those by-elections really didn't matter in terms of the larger context. And the example that comes to my mind is that, if you hit a 6 while you're doing net practice, that really doesn't count. What counts is, the actual match. So I think that entire popularity narrative is also now being tested, and I think in the next couple of months, by the time elections draw near, the situation that you're seeing now would be different.
If I go with what you just said, this actually means that Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf is in a current phase of a bubble, maybe, where they are apparently more popular. The party head is contesting elections, and the situation might be entirely different in next 10 months or 9 months, whatever time is left. But if that is the fact, why the government is shying away from their demand of going for elections? And I'm asking this to you because theoretically speaking, me being a kindergarten student of politics, I understand that a political party's real strength lies in the heart of the people, and they're never shy of going back to their citizenry and say, look, here we are, and please vote for us. So why the government is reluctant to go for elections?
Because the government doesn't need to go for elections. Why should it go for elections? It is taking all the difficult decisions. Those decisions have a certain cost attached to them. The government is willing to pay that cost in order to ensure that in the long term our economy is standing on firm foundations. The constitution allows the sitting government to hold elections on time, unless the sitting government wants to hold them early. So when the PTI demands those elections, it has a right to demand them. The government has absolutely
government is not obliged to
at all to accept those demands. So I think the government is doing the right thing. It requires time to take those difficult decisions. It requires time to tell the electorate that this entire narrative of PTI was flawed, and it requires time to provide relief to the electorate before it goes into elections. And because the constitution allows the government to finish its entire term, I think the government is absolutely doing the right thing.
Fahad, when we talk about this entire situation that is developing in the country now, the opposition is on the roads, the government is trying to catch hold of the situation. Amid all of this, there are few things that are going out of hands, apparently. And one of this is the security situation of the country. Not only Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan has started hitting us very hard in our soft belly in places like Karak. This is not former FATA, this is now mainstream KP. But also recently an attempt of suicide has just been stopped by police. There have been a very sad, tragic incidents taken place in Peshawar. What is exactly happening? Are we losing control of the security situation of the country?
I don't think that we're losing control. I think it is a source of concern. I don't think that anybody should pretend otherwise. What happened in Bannu a couple of days back, there have been a series of other incidents. So clearly there has been an uptick in terms of terrorist incidents in Pakistan, and then of course, as you referred to, this suicide attack in Islamabad. So clearly there is the graph has sort of spiked a bit. Does that mean that the situation is getting out of hand? I don't think so. I think Pakistan has a very enviable track record. There are very few countries in the world, and I say this with all the persuasion at my command. There are very few countries in the world and very few armies in the world who have actually overcome the threat of terrorism in a short period of a couple of years. We were able to do that, especially after the APS incident, 4, 5 years, 6 years, and we were able to completely, not just dominate the security landscape, but ensure that TTP had to really seek refuge in Afghanistan. Now, what needs to be done now? I think there is a clear acknowledgement within the government that this situation needs to be controlled immediately. And I think because we've had this experience before, because we've seen what a wave of terrorism can do to our country, to our society, I think there are no two ways about it. There is no confusion, there is no ambiguity, there is no ambivalence in terms of should we do it, should we not do it. It's only a question of reorganizing ourselves and going after the terrorists again. There was some dialogue with the TTP that hasn't worked out, and therefore I think now Pakistan is very clear that there is no other option but to ensure that the TTP's back is completely broken.
The Afghan Taliban, a group that has always been thought to be, I mean, the West always says Pakistan have been supporting them, and yes, we have played a role in trying to mainstream their diplomatic ties with the world. We hosted 2 OICs back to back. Didn't work for them, unfortunately. But the experience with Tehreek-e-Taliban, Afghan Taliban's government is not going very well. Recently, they have banned girls' education, which Pakistan does not appreciate, and also the fact that many of the leaders of Tehreek-e-Taliban and the Baloch Liberation Army, that is another problem for the government, are enjoying shelter or protection in Afghanistan. Isn't Afghanistan turning out to be another challenge for Pakistan?
It is absolutely a challenge, and I think, and if you look at the recent statements coming from the government, from the Foreign Office and from other relevant agencies, I think there's a clear indication that Pakistan is telling the government of Afghanistan that the way things are going is not acceptable, and this terrorism emanating from the soil of Afghanistan will have to stop. So I think there is absolute clarity that the way that things are going, this cannot be acceptable, and Pakistan will not be allowed to revert back to those days where there were attacks all over the country. That we cannot afford, and that will not happen. It's a difficult situation, no doubt, but I think because the state of Pakistan has been dealing with such situations, in terms of the Afghan issue previously also, I think hopefully things will turn out to be better, to be
coming
in
back
a better
to
condition.
Politics that we were talking about, there is one more interlinked factor with the state of terrorism. Now, while the terrorists have started hitting us hard in many places that you have said is a point of concern for the government, army has started responding in many areas. And during the political discourse that PTI adopted without naming anyone in a specific initially, it actually dented a lot of goodwill that Pakistan's military was enjoying in the common people. Not only they tarnished the image of the institute, but also created, this by taking names of the people eventually by their senior officers. Don't you believe this is another challenge for us, particularly when we are at such a difficult stage?
Shabbat, I call this the PTI scorched earth policy. Burn everything down. There's a very famous quote in a book which turned out to be a best-selling series also, called The Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Where it is said about a certain character that she would burn down the city if she could rule over the ashes. And I think that we can draw a parallel here. Any leader who thinks that he can burn down the country just so he could rule is something that is absolutely unacceptable. What we've seen in the last couple of months is the kind of erratic behavior that no politician in any democratic country should have. But unfortunately, when you have a political leader attacking your institutions, attacking very senior people in those institutions, accusing them of things that one cannot even imagine, then clearly, it is meant to destabilize those institutions. I mean, there are no two other ways about it. So I think what we've seen in the last 6-7 months, even as a Pakistani, I would never want to see again. Because see, ultimately, what we require is stability. And when we talk about stability, it is not just economic stability, it is political stability and institutional stability. The constitutional framework within which this entire country is run should not be held hostage for individual political ambitions. So that's what we've seen happening. I think, in my opinion, is that I think that pendulum is swinging back, and we are coming slowly towards a normal state of being where the government of Pakistan and the state of Pakistan realize that they have to function within a larger framework where no individual or no one party would be allowed to hold everyone hostage.
Another important thing that I would want to ask you is Pakistan's relationship with the United States. Now, US and Pakistan have been partners in this region. We have been their frontline allies, as they call us, particularly after 9/11, and as long as United States was having this presence in Afghanistan. But with PTI's rhetoric, claiming that it was United States, US-led conspiracy theory, the theory that says United States actually sabotaged everything for them, I would not question you what US got out of bringing Shehbaz Sharif in power, but I would want to understand if that has damaged the diplomatic relationship between the two sides.
I mean, number one, the US had nothing to do with the PTI government being thrown out. The US had nothing to do with the PDM government being brought in. Let's settle that once and for all. That is absolutely nothing but a bunch of lies, and I think the PTI itself is now trying to distance itself from its own narrative. And I think if you recall, Mr. Imran Khan has also said that I want to move on, which to me seems very strange. How do you move on after you've completely wrecked the political landscape by making these wild accusations? But anyways, I mean, now that we know that that was nothing but a bunch of lies, we can see what damage it has done to those relationships. But if you're talking about damage to our international relations, then clearly it is not just the US. And I can tell you that I've been traveling quite a bit while on these official tours, and I've seen myself the damage that was done by the previous government, not just to the relationship with the US, but relationship with China, which is the cornerstone of our foreign policy in terms of how the PTI government dealt with CPEC, relationship with Saudi Arabia, and relationship with Turkey. Now, these are the closest countries that we have in terms of our foreign policy, the countries that have always stood with Pakistan in times of need. I think the kind of reckless foreign policy that we saw being conducted by the previous government, it has really damaged our standing in the eyes of not just these critical, crucial, important countries, but generally. Which actually leads me to my next point. Now, the challenge now is to repair that damage. How do we tell these countries that no, that was an aberration? This is not how the state of Pakistan wants to treat its friends. So that damage control is now, hopefully, and from what I see, is happening in a rather effective manner. The Prime Minister has been to China, he's been to Saudi Arabia, he's been to Turkey, and in all these places, I've seen that there is a renewed effort. The CPEC is being brought back in terms of the lost momentum. The momentum is being generated again. With Turkey, the PM has been there twice, I think, or thrice. Relations are being brought back to where they should be. And with Saudi Arabia also, hopefully in the next, at some point, we are working towards a $10 billion investment in terms of the refinery for Gwadar. So that's also an advanced stage. So generally, in the short time this government has, I think one of the key priorities is to bring back our relationship with key countries to a level where we can start doing business with them more effectively.
Fahad, would that have been any other person, any other politician sitting in this chair and telling me this, I would have said, okay, this is rhetoric. Because certainly when rhetoric is coming from one side, there has to be a lashback. But you telling this to me, a journalist that I've been reading and following so many years, I don't know you as a person who would lie for anyone. I have not seen your writings going on either side, despite the fact that you are today. But you never. Are you sure that countries like China, a country that we believe to be our largest strategic asset, the relationship with China, a relationship with Saudi Arabia, a country that has helped Pakistan even during the hours when the entire world was against us. Let me remind you the time when we had gone under sanctions, and it was Saudi Arabia giving us
Absolutely.
So are you personally witness to their concerns?
I have seen how the CPEC project was slowed down. There was no, I'm not giving you any breaking news. Even when the PTI government, PTI was in power, everybody knew that this had happened. The project had slowed down. In terms of relationship with Turkey, we know that so many companies, Turkish companies, which had made huge investments in Pakistan, how they were being treated. We also know so many other tensions, problems with other countries. So again, this is not something that this is, which is a very well kept secret. It was an open thing. What is clear is that there is a deliberate effort to now repair that damage and put the relationship back on sound footing, because we need these countries to help us out, not just economically. Of course, we are in a difficult position now, thanks to so many other reasons. But ultimately, these countries have always backed us, and Pakistan needs to be a responsible member of the global community. We need to be normal. We need to have good relationship. You can't have this toxic, negative rhetoric and approach towards everybody. So I think it will take a while to damage, to repair the damage.
A while and an effort as well. And in this spate of effort, you are going to need support from various corners to increase the help in digital diplomacy as well, which is obviously another field.
Which is absolutely a very important field, and I think that is something that can be used very well in terms of our outreach towards the world, not just in terms of reaching out to the governments, but also reaching out to the people. So I think digital diplomacy gives us the kind of leverage that countries like Pakistan perhaps didn't have previously.
And Fahad, you are going to promise me that you're going to tell the Prime Minister that PTV World, being the only English language channel, is trying to do its bit in this spate of effort.
I completely agree with you. We need to communicate much more effectively. I am a firm believer that Pakistan has to tell its story effectively to the world. In the previous decades, I will not point towards a particular time in Pakistan's history, but over the previous decades, I think one major blunder that we've done is that because of our poor strategic communication to the world, we've allowed other countries to define who we are, whereas it should be the other way around. So therefore, communicating in English effectively on all platforms and being able to tell our story is something that we really need to do very well. There's a lot of room for improvement.
And you are telling him that we are doing a good job, right?
Well, I'm sure that he is looking at this channel and appreciating what is being done.
Thank you very much.
But having said that, I must say there is so much more that can be done.
Thank you very much, Fahad, for being our guest. Ladies and gentlemen, this was a very insightful session with one of the most remarkable guests that we have recently had on this channel, and I hope it has answered a lot of your questions. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.